Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Holistic Health Radio. I'm your host, Sarah Liz King. Today, I'm joined on the podcast. Oh, I can't even speak. It's definitely been a full day of recording. I will start that again. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Holistic Health Radio. I'm your host, Sarah Liz King. I'm an exercise physiologist and health coach, empowering you to find your healthy balance with food, fitness, and your body. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Dr. Cate Howell, a seasoned health expert with over 3 decades of experience and a deep rooted passion for mental health and well being. Driven by her commitment to providing accessible and practical education for both health professionals and the community, Dr. Howell's journey has been nothing short of inspiring. In the year 2000, she was honored with a prestigious Churchill Fellowship, leading her to explore the primary care management of anxiety and depression. The experience fueled her dedication to the field, culminating in the completion of her PhD in depression research. Throughout her remarkable career, Dr. Howell has made a profound impact by collaborating with various organizations and mental health programs. Her outstanding contributions were duly recognized in 2012 when she was awarded the Order of Australia Medal for her services to mental health. Today, Dr. Howell continues to take a positive difference through her own practice, which encompasses clinical and educational facets. She also extends her expertise as a medical education consultant and lecturer to various organizations. To date, Dr. Howell has penned 6 influential books on mental health and well-being, with her latest work, The Flourishing Woman, a mental health and well-being guide, now available for purchase. Join us as we delve into her expertise and insights on mental health and beyond. A big warm welcome to the show, Dr. Cate. How are you today?
I am very good, thank you. And it's good to be here.
It is amazing. And we were just chatting before that you live in Adelaide, but you're actually in Sydney this weekend. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, up for the
We could
weekend.
have done, yeah, I was saying we could have done this podcast in person if we had known, but we're only a few short suburbs away doing this through the beauty of technology.
Yes.
I always like starting off these conversations with a few fun get to know you questions. The first of which is always the same, which is what is your coffee order?
Well, I believe it's called an Americana because a barista told me that recently. So long black with a dash of milk.
Oh, okay. I feel like everyone in Australia just calls it a long black with a dash of milk, but
That's right. That's what I've been saying.
maybe maybe when we're in America, I think maybe it's called an Americano, but as long as we're Australia side, we'll call it a long black with a little dash.
Yeah, I love my coffee, I have to say.
Don't we all? I was late to the game as a coffee drinker, and now I can never go back.
Mm.
What are you grateful for today?
Well, I think many things. Just being here in Sydney and having a little bit of time out and then going to the conference and hearing some new things. I'm grateful always for people in my life. I was chatting to a girlfriend earlier and I'm grateful, to be here on the podcast. There we are.
Yeah. Well, it's really wonderful to have you today. I'm excited for us to talk about mental health and women's health. But again, saving that for a minute.
Sure.
This question sometimes catches people off guard, but what is the best gift that you've ever given someone else or you've ever received yourself?
I love gifts. I'm a gift person. So I like giving gifts and, sometimes it'll be a small thing, sometimes it'll be bigger. The best gift I've ever given myself, I think, is buying the cottage that I live in. It was actually my parents' cottage in a country town in South Australia. And so it's an old railway workers' cottage with a beautiful garden. And my father died. My mum reached a stage where she couldn't manage it. So I bought it from her and she moved closer to me into a unit. And it's just the most peaceful, lovely cottage. So that's the biggest gift and best gift I've ever given myself. And I recently helped my son buy a car. And normally it's not such a big thing, for him, but he needed one. And so that was lovely to be able to do that.
I'm sure he had the biggest smile on his face
He was very
when.
happy. Mm.
What can we always find in your fridge in that beautiful little cottage that you live in?
Yeah. Well, a variety of things. But I like to have blueberries or raspberries and some yogurt at hand, because those times where you just want something but you don't need a lot, and it's just a lovely, I even get little tubs of yogurt and just throw some fruit in it, so I don't even have to get a bowl out. So it's just a really nice thing to have there.
Yeah, I think that's what I love about summer is when we start getting all the fresh berries again. It's
Yeah,
my
yeah,
favorite time of year.
yeah.
And last but not least, what are your daily non-negotiables that make you feel your absolute best?
I think that first coffee, and I usually read the paper on my iPad while I have the coffee, and walking the dogs. I have two dogs who are 3 and going on 4, and they're very active, so they need walking several times a day. And I walk to the river near where I live, so it looks out over an island, and it's just really calming. And I think quiet time. I'm one of those people that I'm quite happy in my own skin, and having that quiet time just to think and perhaps look at a book or something like that helps me feel good.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think being able to spending some time in nature is often a really common thread when people are answering that question. And I think it just speaks to how grounding it is to kind of get yourself outside and into a green space of some kind.
Yeah, very, very important and very,
Yeah,
very soothing. Yes.
so soothing. Now, I've given our listeners a little bit of information about who you are in your introduction, but from your own words, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and also what you do?
Okay. So I suppose the central theme has been helping people. So whatever role I'm in, I see myself as that sort of healing, helping person. So whether it's been, I actually started out my career as an occupational therapist, and then went back and did medicine. So, and was a GP. And I've served as a GP in various capacities, but also, education for health professionals, but also the public. And my writing is sharing information. So the education and the writing is about getting the information out there that may help and may heal to a much broader audience. And, like a podcast too. So that, I think the central theme is healing, really.
Yeah, and you've written quite a few books, your most recent one being The Flourishing Woman, and you address so many different topics that are highly relevant to women across their different stages of adult life, including, why women often put themselves last and particular ways to overcome stress and overwhelm and anxiety and so many things that we face as women day to day. What inspired you to write this particular book and explore these topics more specifically?
I think the books evolve, different topics come up, and I think about, would this be something useful to write about? The women's book actually followed a book for men, and the men's book arose because I was at the time doing some work with military personnel, and the need for a book on men's mental health became apparent. But then I was out giving talks on the men's book, and a lot of women came along, And I started to reflect on the needs of women. And obviously I'm female and I have my colleagues and sisters and friends and so on. And so I just started mulling over the idea, well, maybe there's a need for something for women. And a couple of other things happened. One was I asked the women who came to the talk about the men's book if it would be helpful, and there was a resounding yes. And also I looked at what was out there, and there were books for women on specific topics, but there wasn't really an overarching holistic approach to all the various things that can impact women over their lifespan, as you said. So I thought, right, there's a need, and approached the publisher, and it was written.
There you go. I'm really interested. Obviously, you have that background of exploring both women's mental health and men's mental health. What are some of the differences in topics that you saw as really important between the genders? Like, what were the differences, and also what were some of the crossovers between the two?
Yeah. So I think what I did with each of them at the start was have a look at, are there specific, what do we know? Is there specific information about men's mental health, about women's mental health? So having a look at, the literature around that. And, there are some differences in what's written and what's known, the different influences as we grow up in society, for example, and the sort of problems that are more common amongst men or women. So for men and women, anxiety and depression are very common. For men, substance use issues are more common, probably because of self-medicating for the other issues. And for women, anxiety rates are higher. And unfortunately, PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder, is higher in women as higher than in men. So there are some differences, there's some crossover, but obviously for women, I also wanted to bring in, what are some of the different areas that we need to address, and reproductive health came into that across the lifespan. So whether it's around having a baby or around menopause and changes in our bodies and our hormones, and potential impacts on mental health issues, but also for women, looking at those topics like, why do we put ourselves last? Why do we struggle to prioritise ourselves at times? Why can we be so self-critical? So, some of those things I was aware of, and I was researching it and talking with women. And certainly as I've been out there talking to groups of women, those particular areas have been, there have been a lot of questions about them. So definitely it resonates with women.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a really important topic, which is that concept of really struggling to prioritize self care, and a lot of women putting themselves at the bottom of their own priority list. From your research and your experience and talking to women, is this due to like social conditioning, or are there other factors at play?
Yeah, there's probably different factors. Social conditioning is a big one. And, we have to remember that as we grow up, we're influenced by so many things, family, friends, education systems, government systems, culture, religion, all sorts of things. And so we're absorbing all of those influences like sponges, and it does shape how we think about ourselves and about the world. So, if you think about some of the messages that you might have been told or received or observed or read about or seen on media, for example, growing up, there will be lots of different messages that would have said probably, care for others, nurture others, be the best mum or even the perfect mum, uh, be a great friend, be a great partner, And sometimes that might mean, you have to sacrifice your own needs for other people. Now, it's okay sometimes to do that. Sometimes we have to, when we have a partner who's distressed, or a mum who's getting older, or a child who's not well, we have to do that. But the problem is we can't do that all the time. And we certainly need to be able to be okay ourselves if we're going to help look after anyone else. It's that old metaphor of on the plane of put the oxygen on yourself first before you help others. So I think we absorb a lot of those messages. And I certainly remember direct messages growing up. There was one school excursion where we were told to bring certain things and one child forgot. And so they said to us, who will be kind and give up their things, to help this child? And that's what I did, because I knew we needed to be kind. But the problem was then it was actually to prevent sunburn, and I went home sunburnt and the other child was less sunburnt. So, we're taught those things. Plus, we have to remember too that we are human and we compare to others. And it comes from survival. So if you were down the street and there was a very large tiger wandering up the road, you would want to compare yourself to the tiger. And if you were sensible, you'd duck into a building and avoid the tiger. If you thought, oh, there's a nice cat, I'll pat the tiger, you might be in danger. So that's why we compare. But the problem is we do compare to our family and friends, and of course with media and social media and all of those things, we are drawn to comparison. Now, again, it's not always bad, but young ones can be very susceptible and very critical of themselves, and a lot of what we see isn't real, as you know and probably have talked about. So we're comparing to this ideal. And I certainly remember the changes, I think it was probably 80s when there was a lot of stuff around being a superwoman, and literally it was deemed a good thing. You can work, you can have children, you can be this beautiful woman, etc. And suddenly we were meant to be all of this. And it's actually not realistic. It's a mystical creature. So yeah, so all of those comparisons can lead us to feel less than as well. And so then we're less likely to say, actually, no, I need to look after myself.
Yeah.
And of course, saying no can be hard as well. We need the skills to do that. And also, if we've been in relationships that perhaps have been super critical or even abusive, we can go into fawn mode, which is just, yes, I'll do it to please you. So societal influences plus all those others mean we can people please as well.
Yeah, I often find that a lot of people, attach almost their identity to I'm the provider, I'm the caretaker, and if I'm not doing this, first of all, who else is going to do it? But also then there's that kind of like guilt and shame about who am I if I'm not doing all of these things all the time?
Mm.
So, for anyone, I guess, that might be struggling to place themselves higher on their priority list, what kind of advice would you give them on where to start?
I think probably awareness is the first place to start, just being aware of whether it's happening, whether we are self-sacrificing, to our own detriment, whether we need to address it. And, it may be that, we're not feeling great, or other people are saying, you're doing a lot, you look tired, all of those things. A friend of mine's a GP and mostly deals with women's health issues. And she said the most common thing women present with now is tiredness. And sometimes it's due to the physical issues, and sometimes it's due to what we're carrying, the level of responsibilities. So awareness. And then stepping back and just having a look at it, what do I need to keep doing and what can I let go of? So it may be focusing on what we value, what's important, and prioritising those things. It might be delegating, do I need to hand over those things to someone else, whether that's a partner, some sort of service that can help, a cleaner or something like that, or a concierge service. And I know money comes into that. But are there things we can just let go that don't need to be done as well? And having a look at our thinking too, how are we thinking about ourselves? And are we buying into, some negative thinking or self-critical thinking that may be driving some of those behaviours to be everything to everyone? Yeah.
Yeah. I think the point that you made about self-criticism is such a common thread, and it's probably not gender specific, but, I guess working and speaking with women all the time, low self-confidence, low self-esteem, a lot of critical thinking is often like a very common experience and usually quite a big barrier to living a life that feels fulfilling and making sure that you take care of yourself.
Mm.
Are there any strategies or techniques you recommend for women to kind of help reduce this self criticism and to help them boost their confidence in maybe making different decisions that might support their well being, even if it comes at the cost of, maybe letting somebody else down as a result?
Yeah. So one thing I think is important is what words do we use to describe this area? And I like that you've used self-confidence. That's how we feel in relation to ourselves. And one of the words I'm not so keen on is self-esteem, because a lot of people think they've got high or low self-esteem, and it's almost like, well, where is this self-esteem? And it's actually how we think about ourselves. So and the sort of beliefs we develop about ourselves. So I tend to use self-belief and self-confidence, and also self-compassion I'm a big fan of. So looking again at our thinking is important, just catching our thoughts. And some of these things require us to get that little bit of an observer position, just stepping back a little bit and having a look at the thought and, in a way, asking ourselves, would I say this to my friend or my sister or my child? Because we're often so much more critical of ourselves than we would ever be to anyone else. So if we wouldn't say it to a friend, we need to work on not saying it to ourselves, and perhaps finding a thought, if we are saying something to ourselves that's really self-critical, reframing it a bit so that it is a little bit more reasonable, a little bit kinder, so a bit more compassionate, and just practicing with that. That's one thing that can help. Another is being aware of the stories that we tell ourselves. So as we mentioned, all of those influences growing up, what that leads us to do is create narratives in our mind about ourselves. And it's completely, it's what everyone does. It's how humans make sense of the world, how we find meaning, how we understand things. So we create these stories. So one of my little stories I often use in teaching about myself is, I'm a hopeless cook. I can't cook for the life of me. And the reality is, I didn't do a lot of cooking growing up or do home ec or anything like that. That's the reality. But the other reality is I actually did pick up a few things and cook for my family. And, I don't love it, but I can do the basics. So a much kinder thought would be, I'm a pretty reasonable cook. Okay.
Yeah.
Can't go on MasterChef, but I can do enough. So it's changing those stories as well, recognising them. And a common one for women is that not measuring up. I'm not
Yeah.
pretty enough. I'm not smart enough, it's those measuring up things that, end up in stories. So again, be aware, and can we look for the exceptions to those stories? Because what we tend to do is hold on to anything that fits with the story, and we go, there, see, I'm not a great cook. But we
Yeah.
ignore the stuff that's outside.
Yep, you hit the nail on the head. I think that not good enough story is such a strong one.
Mm,
And looking for evidence that maybe that's not always the case is so helpful, because our brain is just wired, especially when we're not feeling all that great about ourselves, to just reinforce that same story, and creating awareness and getting some space from it and going, actually, maybe that isn't the case 100% of the time. Here are some ways that I am a good cook, for
yeah,
example, or I do prioritize my self-care, or my worth as a human being isn't just related to the way that I look or needing to be beautiful, can help us start to see, hey, this story might exist. It might be a very well written story, but I can also create different stories about myself as a person.
absolutely. And I think always weave into the stories that self-compassion, just be
Yeah.
a little bit kinder, recognize we are human and we have so many strengths, and occasionally we mess up, and that's just who we are.
Yeah. That common humanity is such an important part. I'm also a big proponent of self-compassion as a really helpful tool in guiding us in whatever we might be
Mm.
experiencing. I know one of the topics that you kind of delve into your book is mental health and menopause as a topic. And I think I think menopause is getting more light shed on it as a really unique experience that women go through, and we're having, more research around it now. But could you elaborate on the unique kind of mental health challenges that women face during menopause?
Yeah, yeah. So menopause, we think about sort of perimenopause, so leading up to menopause, and then menopause itself, when menstruation has stopped for 12 months. And during perimenopause, there's a lot of fluctuations in the hormonal levels in our body, and obviously significant changes with menopause too. Now, hormones that influence the reproductive system also influence the brain. And I was just at a talk this morning actually looking at that, and there's the brain has more receptors or things on the cells that will attach to the hormones than any other part of the body, amazingly enough. So the fluctuations or the absence of certain hormones can impact our mental health and well-being. Not every woman is impacted by the hormonal changes. There's great variation. And I think that's the thing. We have to really take each woman individually and hear their story and hear their physical symptoms and hear the emotional symptoms, and try and make sense of what's going on through the story, through any examination, through any investigations. So I suppose the most common mental health issues in that time would be depression or anxiety. So that the changing hormones, the changing brain biochemistry as a result may produce changes in mood or anxiety symptoms. So they
Yeah.
would be big ones.
And what are some of the best ways that women can support themselves through menopause, or even like perimenopause, I guess in a more holistic sense? Like, what can we be doing to make sure that we really support ourselves during that time?
Yeah. I think that holistic approach is really important. So looking at, all the things you're doing that may, that contribute to health, physical and mental health. So nutrition, exercise, sleep is a big one. Sometimes sleep can be disturbed. Do we need some help addressing that? Having time out to relax, reducing stress levels, being, again, a little bit patient and kind with ourselves. Obviously, things like memory and so on can be affected as well during this time. So if we expect ourselves to be performing at 150% cognitively, then, maybe we're putting a lot of pressure on ourselves. But also, if you can see a GP or gynecologist who focuses on this area and has good knowledge, that might be very helpful as well to assess what's going on thoroughly and to look at, do we need to address the physical symptoms in any way or the emotional symptoms in any other way, in terms of potentially different sorts of medication. And also psychologically, it may help to talk to somebody. It may help to, talk to about this phase of life. It's a transition for women. And it often coincides with perhaps being at a high level in career or having teenage children or elderly parents. So there's a lot of other pressures as well. So sometimes addressing those things can help us cope with the physical or emotional symptoms too.
Yeah, and I think looking at it holistically, like you do, and you speak about in your book, is something that I definitely use, and I think it's important to kind of emphasize that lifestyle is so important in managing our well-being, but we should never stigmatize the role that medicine and medication can play in supporting ourselves and our well-being. It's never going to be the thing that gives us that instantaneous fix. Like, we still need to look after ourselves, but I think we're having more conversations that normalize it as a part of our overall treatment, support, self-care through what can be, really big change for us. Like you said, not only hormonally are we changing, but we might be going through some significant changes in our life stage as well. And often when I'm talking to clients, and a lot of women kind of go through, I guess, different changes at different stages, but the majority of the clients that come to see me and speak to might be at a stage of life where starting a family is something that they are really wanting. And motherhood is so interesting when people, I guess, first become a first time mom, and they're oftentimes rethinking, what is my purpose? What is my meaning to life? How will I feel fulfilled? Were there ever any times in your own life where maybe you went through like a significant change and you felt a little bit lost in terms of your own meaning and fulfillment?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? I think, all the major transitions lead you to question, don't they? So whether it's having a child, whether it's menopause, whether it's turning 40 or 50 or whatever, you naturally review and question. I think that the time that I found the hardest was post-separation, marital separation and divorce. And that year or two after was very challenging on a number of levels. And certainly, the things that helped me were the support of my friends. I think our friendships, are incredibly helpful, both practically and emotionally. I did go and see a therapist a couple of times just to say, look, this is what I'm going through, and really just to talk about it. And that was helpful. I did cut the load a little bit, reduce what I was doing just to allow me some time to process and get through. So all of that. And I did a few nice things for me. I went went away for a few weeks, I just took that bit of extra time out. So that was probably the trickiest time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all of those little elements. I think a lot of space and time, although it is really, really difficult to give yourself, I guess, breathing room, can be the most effective way to gain perspective and kind of, I guess, get back in touch with what is important to you and your values specifically, because those can change throughout our life, where they can look different in the way that we express them or get them in our lives. Um, I love that your book is called The Flourishing Woman, and I was really curious as to what your definition of flourishing is.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Um, I guess the definitions are thriving and also bringing in that sense of fulfillment in life. One of the speakers at the happiness conference talks about it as doing things that matter, no matter how small, and I quite like that. Um, but also, I think it's about being a bit in flow, where you have that feeling of I'm doing, I'm doing okay and doing the things that I'm meant to be doing right now. And I have that sense of, things are moving along. I think that is sort of thriving, and maybe a sprinkling of joy here and there. I think we forget about joy,
Mm.
just being able to have a laugh, being able to smile at different things, doing something that, does lead to that feeling of happiness. So yeah, all of those things mixed together, a bit of alchemy, mix them together.
Yeah, yeah. And if someone listening doesn't feel like they're at that stage where they feel like they are flourishing, do you
So,
feel like it is attainable and achievable for everyone to get there?
yes, I do. And it's not a state we're in all the time. We're human and, we have challenges. We have tiredness. We have, days when we're irritable. We can't feel like we're flourishing all the time. Uh, and I think, remember to, even if we're really struggling and it's like the only moment is this moment, and we can't see that we could flourish in the future, if we remember that if we take very tiny, tiny steps, we will, through those small steps, get a little bit closer. Um, so there is always the potential for change. The reason I've worked with people for so many years, and whether it's clinically or in writing or whatever it is, teaching, is because I see the potential in people, and I've seen people change. I've seen people change slowly, quickly, and change is always, always possible.
Yeah. And I love that you say that. It's probably the reason that I do what I do as well. One of my things that I'm often saying to my clients when we do, our weekly check-ins is, what went well? What are some of the challenges that you're experiencing? And often when there's this point of, not being able to see the change, people can feel almost a little bit hopeless. But I always remind them, little by little, all of the healing that we do, it all adds up. And to take moments to actually reflect on, no matter how small, what are some of the positive changes that you have made? Because I always think we think about everything else there is left to do and left to change. And we are very hesitant to take a moment to take a step back and actually go, you know what? I did good with X or Y or Z, and that matters, that counts. So I love that you mentioned that small changes can also be really powerful ones. And I wanted to kind of wrap up what has been such an incredible conversation with, what is like one piece of advice that you would like our listeners to walk away with today?
There's so many pieces, but I think the one I want to focus on is, seeing that spark within you, that light within you. Everyone listening in their own way is unique and amazing. And they may not feel amazing at this moment, but I see it in them, and you no doubt do as well. And so to remember that, we can forget the resources within us, the steps we have taken, the kindness we've shown other people, the fact that we can do all sorts of things, and we may diminish what it is. We may think, oh, well, that's not important, but it is. And I think just holding on to that is so important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And for our listeners who would like to connect with you and find out more about your books or everything that you're doing, where can we connect with you online?
So my website has lots of resources and all sorts of things and information about the books, and that's drcatehowell.com.au. And I do have a public Facebook page and an Instagram page and LinkedIn. And one of these days, maybe 2024, I'll do some little film clips and put them up. I'm moving towards that slowly. But there's lots of lovely posts with information and hopefully supporting and inspiring people as well.
Amazing. And I'll be sure to put all of those links in the show notes for our listeners so they can easily find you. Thank you again, Cate. Like today's has been such a great conversation. For anyone who has really enjoyed today's episode, be sure to give it a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube and subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, be sure to give us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps support the show and helps other people to find this podcast, which is an amazing free resource. And of course, you can tag myself or Dr. Cate on our social media in any of your stories, and we'll be sure to reshare those. Until next time, though, keep looking after yourselves, and I will be back next week with a fresh new episode you can wrap your ears around.